Milan finished 20 points behind champions Napoli last season, just about scraping into fourth thanks to Juve's slightly dodgy financial situation. But they needed a summer revamp. The sale of Sandro Tonali helped to forge this, but how has it worked? Is it currently working? And how do they look ahead of a quite difficult league campaign chasing their city rivals and a tough Champions League group? Milan had quite a bit of squad churn over the summer. Looking at it here, the transfer marks for their ins and their outs. We'll start with their outs because obviously we all know that Sandro Tonali left. They sent De Ketelaere on loan to Atalanta, and the rest are free transfers and loans that aren't particularly important. But you can see Brahim Diaz left after the end of his loan, so he needed replacing. Zlatan left after retiring, he needed replacing, and there are a couple of weaker areas in the squad that needed a bit of a revamp. So obviously the main loss for Milan over the summer was Sandro Tonali. Milan looked to kind of replace him in more of the aggregate with a few different players, and we're going to have a little look at how they did that and look at the kind of shift that they've also made away from kind of more of a Sandro Tonali-esque player to something that we've seen across quite a few different clubs this over the summer in more of a focus to ball carrying. They've aimed to replace Tonali with three players: Gianni Reinders, Ruben Loftus-Cheek and Yunus Musa. So when we look at those three players, what you see is they are quite largely ball carriers. So the progressive carries are really high. So when you look at Ruben Loftus-Cheek, for example, admittedly he's played less minutes than, for example, Tonali did last season. But when you look at them side by side, his progressive carry, successful take-ons are a lot higher than Tonali's are. And as managers like Pep Guardiola, Postecoglou look at players who are carriers, look at Nunez, Kovacic, look at Brennan Johnson, they're kind of the players that are being targeted today. Milan are kind of following that similar trajectory, and it looks quite interesting when you see how they set up as well. But I think it's quite an interesting way of replacing Sandro Tonali because Musa also is a really progressive carrier. Admittedly, his other stats don't really reflect a fantastic player, but he was playing in a really not very good Valencia team last season. Didn't get that many minutes. But Gianni Reinders is also quite interesting. Also a good carrier. Also quite deadly from general attacking output. He was really good for Alkmaar last season. That's why he's obviously made that move. But is across particularly those leagues, he stood out very, very highly. And he's a great runner from midfield, which is something that Milan are looking to use a lot more this season. So Milan also had to target replacement for Brahim Diaz. Now they did that with both Christian Pulisic and Samuel Chukwueze, two good carriers of the ball, particularly Chukwueze last season. Pulisic obviously had a bit of an injury-dogged season last season. Didn't play particularly well in a Chelsea team that wasn't playing particularly well. But taking him out of that scenario, we've seen so far this season that there's definitely promise from him. And Chukwueze's been more of like a bench player so far for Milan, but he's definitely one of those who can beat a man, carries the ball really well, and kind of links up to those, Reinders and Loftus-Cheek and Musa, who are all kind of being targeted as progressive carriers, as Milan look to kind of not follow, but they're matching the similar trend that we're seeing across other kind of elite teams across Europe. So Milan have had an okay start to this season, most notably one bad game where they lost 5-1 to Inter, and this is the setup that they had for that game. So it's a 4-3-3 with Krunic kind of sitting at the base of a midfield three, with Reinders and Loftus-Cheek either side. You can see that back four, which typically kind of Calabria would invert into here with Krunic, and Theo Hernandez would sit kind of wider with Pulisic sitting a little bit inside, Loftus-Cheek and Reinders supporting up with Giroud, which was okay, but they were largely kind of exploited down the sides. So with Dumfries and DeMarco down either wing, particularly this gap between Theo Hernandez and Thiaw was really exploited for a couple of the goals. Thuram especially kind of targeted Thiaw. Yeah, that's hopefully how you say his name. And for one absolute screamer, just isolated him, scored off that left-hand side, and to be honest, they never really stood a chance. At 2-1, they looked okay, but there was just gaps that were appearing across the team. But when you compare to how they played in the most recent game against Verona, there were a few changes. So Calabria was injured, as was Magnon, so in came Sportiello, Musa and Florenzi, with Theo Hernandez also out, and Tomori came in. Loftus-Cheek dropped out as well. So it became more of a back five with Krunic and Reinders in the middle, Leao, Giroud and Pulisic. But when in possession, this is kind of more what happened. So Reinders would press forward a little bit in support of Leao, Musa would push forward to kind of cover this area. Leao would push a little bit wider. Florenzi inverted, largely with Krunic, and the centre-back spread wide when in possession. This helped to kind of counteract Verona, who play largely a back five. Milan were okay, I guess, but there were a few opportunities which we'll show in a second where they were kind of exploited with their man-to-man pressing, but they created chances when you have a man like Leao and you give him a good ball in behind. He's going to take him at one point, and that's the one goal that he did score during this game, was when ball was won back in here in midfield. Leao makes a run off the defender in, and it was pretty simple. So taking a look at a couple of these screenshots from the Verona game, you can see that back three, that two in midfield with Florenzi inverting, and it's kind of quite interesting to see kind of how they're using this both to kind of drag this man-to-man press and to also bypass it. So you can see the kind of Verona very much going man-to-man in their pressing, and Tomori hits this ball back to Sportiello. Now, Sportiello doesn't really have the same, not quite as close to Magnon in terms of possession, but in this case, he hits a very nice long pass into Giroud, obviously a little bit further than that. But it just shows how there's kind of the different aspects that Milan can use their height also in attack to sometimes bypass this very sort of cluttered central midfield area. But when we look at how Milan's pressing structure worked, they also went man-to-man, but in this situation, Verona highlighted a bit of a weakness. So here we have Florenzi, who's obviously playing off that inverted left wing-back role, and Leao, Giroud, Pulisic have all pressed over onto that right-hand side, and Verona have switched the ball off to their right-hand side. Florenzi is miles away from this man, so he has all the time in the world. This means that here, the Verona midfielder is running off the back of Reinders, who's just spotted him, but gets that head start. And ultimately, this Verona player plays a nice ball in behind Florenzi for the Verona player to run onto. But this move from Florenzi also means that Tomori has to follow this Verona striker into midfield, vacating this space, which the Verona player runs onto after that pass comes in here. So it kind of highlights a bit of a pressing weakness that Milan do have and did have during this game, because Verona continue forward after this and do create a chance. So is the Milan rebuild currently working? I'd say yes, it currently is. The use of the Tonali money to sign Leao to an extended contract is, as I've said throughout this video, the most important thing that we saw in the summer. But to use that money to bring in a few other players to kind of pack out that squad to hopefully do well in the Champions League and throughout the rest of the season in Serie A, and to bring in a few more ball carriers, which Milan, didn't have the best, but Loftus-Cheek, Pulisic, Chukwueze, Reinders, all looking like good additions. Hopefully they can continue to gel and this team starts to create more chances in which they can score, and also that Pioli kind of works out his tactics to not bring Leao so deep and to really not use that kind of inversion back five Florenzi role again, because it just brought Leao way too deep and he was just far too far away from being able to be on the end of chances and to create chances for the likes of Giroud and Pulisic. But I think it's promising. They've used the money well, and I'm looking forward to see how the rest of the season goes for them. So let me know what you think in the comments, whether you'd like to see a couple of breakdowns of any other teams throughout the rest of this season. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you in the next one.